afraid of losing independence at night.
There is a strange kind of fear that visits quietly at night. Not the fear of monsters, not the fear of darkness, but the fear of slowly becoming someone who no longer belongs to themselves. Maybe you have felt it before. The thought that one day your choices may no longer truly be yours, that life could slowly turn into obligations, expectations, routines, and responsibilities stacked so high that your own voice becomes difficult to hear underneath them all. And perhaps that fear becomes strongest after midnight, when the room is silent, when no one is asking anything from you anymore, when you finally have a moment alone with your thoughts and suddenly realize how exhausted you are from constantly holding your life together. Some people fear loneliness, but others fear dependence even more. They fear needing someone too much, fear losing control over their time, emotions, money, freedom, or identity. Fear waking up one day and realizing they have become trapped inside a life they never consciously chose. And the painful thing is, people who fear losing independence are often the strongest people in the room. The ones who learned early that relying on others could lead to disappointment. The ones who became self-sufficient, not because they wanted to, but because they felt they had to. So they carry everything alone, quietly, patiently, even when their heart is unbearably tired. But tonight, maybe this fear is trying to tell you something deeper. Not that you are weak, not that you are broken, but that somewhere inside you, there is a soul desperately trying not to disappear. And maybe before sleep finds you tonight, we should talk about why that fear hurts so much. The fear of losing independence rarely appears overnight. Most of the time, it grows slowly, silently, over many years. Sometimes it begins in childhood. Maybe you grew up in an environment where your feelings were ignored, where asking for help made you feel guilty, where vulnerability was treated like weakness. So without realizing it, you learned an important survival rule. If I want to feel safe, I can only depend on myself. And at first, that mindset can feel powerful. You become responsible, reliable, mature beyond your age. You solve your own problems. You carry your own pain. You stop expecting comfort from anyone because expecting less feels safer than being disappointed. But over time, self-protection slowly becomes emotional isolation. You begin to fear needing people, because needing people means risking abandonment, risking rejection, risking losing control, and control becomes your emotional shelter. You control your schedule, your finances, your emotions, your future plans. Not because you are cold-hearted, debt, but because unpredictability scares you. Because somewhere deep inside, your nervous system remembers what it felt like when life once became unstable. That is why some people panic at the thought of dependence in relationships. Not because they do not love deeply, but because they fear disappearing inside love. They fear becoming emotionally trapped, fear sacrificing their dreams, fear adjusting themselves again and again until one day they no longer recognize who they are. And honestly, many adults carry this fear quietly, especially people who spent years surviving alone. When you become used to independence, receiving help can strangely feel uncomfortable. Someone offers support, and instead of relief, your chest tightens. A small voice whispers, "What if I become dependent? What if they leave later? What if I lose the ability to survive on my own?" So You keep carrying everything yourself, even when exhausted, even when overwhelmed, even when your heart secretly wishes someone would sit beside you and simply say, "You do not have to hold the entire world alone tonight." But the fear of losing independence is not only emotional. Sometimes it is deeply connected to modern life itself. The world constantly tells us that our worth comes from productivity and self-sufficiency. Be successful, be independent, be emotionally strong, never fall behind, never need too much. And after hearing those messages long enough, dependence starts to feel shameful. Rest feels guilty. Asking for help feels embarrassing. Slowing down feels dangerous. So people become trapped in endless survival mode. Always planning, always working, always preparing for worst-case scenarios. Even at night, their minds continue running. What if I lose my job? What if I become sick? What if I cannot take care of myself anymore? What if one day I lose control of my own life? And perhaps one of the deepest fears underneath all of this is the fear of becoming powerless. Because independence is not only about freedom. For many people, independence represents dignity, the ability to choose, to leave unhealthy situations, to protect yourself, to survive without begging for permission to exist. So naturally, the thought of losing that feels terrifying, especially in a world where so many people have experienced betrayal, manipulation, or emotional neglect. Some people fear being controlled financially. Others fear emotional dependence. Others fear aging itself. There are nights when people lie awake imagining the future. What if one day I cannot do things alone anymore? And behind that thought is often something even more painful. What if I become a burden? That fear breaks more hearts than most people realize. Because human beings deeply want to feel useful, capable, needed. And when independence becomes tied to identity, losing it can feel like losing yourself entirely. But maybe this is where we need to pause and look at something gently. Being independent is healthy, but believing you must carry life entirely alone is not freedom. It is exhaustion wearing the mask of strength. Real strength is not refusing support. Real strength is knowing you can survive alone while still allowing yourself to be loved. And that balance is difficult, especially for people who learned survival before safety, because when you spend years building emotional walls, vulnerability feels dangerous even in safe places. But healing does not mean becoming dependent on everyone. It means learning that connection and independence can exist together. You can love people deeply without losing yourself. You can ask for help without becoming weak. You can rest without becoming lazy. You can lean on someone temporarily without surrendering your identity. Healthy connection does not erase freedom. It protects it. And maybe part of healing this fear begins with asking yourself one quiet question. Have I been protecting my independence or protecting my pain? Because sometimes the fear of losing independence is actually the fear of trusting life again. Trusting that not everyone will control you, not everyone will abandon you, not every relationship will consume you. And slowly, healing begins in very small moments, allowing someone to help you without apologizing, telling the truth when you're tired, admitting you're overwhelmed instead of pretending you're fine, not because you're weak, but because you're human. And humans were never meant to survive emotionally alone forever. Even the strongest hearts need softness sometimes. Even the most independent souls need rest. So tonight, if you have been carrying everything alone for a very long time, Maybe your exhaustion is understandable. Maybe the fear inside you was never irrational. Maybe it was simply a heart trying very hard to protect itself from losing freedom after spending too much of life fighting to keep it. But slowly, gently, you may discover something beautiful. You do not lose yourself by being loved. You lose yourself when fear forces you to hide every vulnerable part of who you are. And perhaps the safest kind of independence is not isolation. Perhaps it is knowing that even if life becomes uncertain, even if you need help sometimes, even if you cannot control everything, you are still worthy of love, dignity, and peace. Maybe tonight, after listening to all of this, your heart still feels a little heavy. Maybe a part of you is still afraid that if you stop being strong for even one moment, life will suddenly fall apart. Afraid that if you depend on someone, you may lose yourself. Afraid that if you loosen your grip on control, pain may return again. And honestly, those fears did not appear without reason. You survived many things quietly. You carried responsibilities people never fully noticed. You became strong because somewhere along the way, you believed you had no other choice. But tonight, before you fall asleep, I hope you remember this gently. You are more than your ability to endure. Your worth is not measured by how much pain you can carry alone. You do not have to constantly prove your independence to deserve love, respect, or safety. Sometimes healing begins not by becoming stronger, but by finally allowing yourself to soften, to breathe slowly, to rest without guilt, to trust that needing comfort does not erase your strength. And even if life remains uncertain tomorrow, even if you still have fears you cannot fully explain, you are still here, still trying, still protecting the fragile parts of your heart, still searching for peace in the middle of all this noise. That matters more than you know. So tonight, let the world become quiet for a little while. You do not need to solve your entire future before sleeping. You do not need to carry every burden alone in this moment. For now, just rest. And maybe, somewhere in the silence of this midnight hour, your tired heart can finally feel safe enough to close its eyes.
Bây giờ chú phải cho tao cái quyền nhất định, chứ còn bây giờ những cái nhà mà động 2 tháng thì tao thu được. Cái nhà động 300-400 mét rồi tháng, bây giờ đến tao không đóng chứ không cho gì đó cắt mất hết, đúng không? Bây giờ các mạng nó quan trọng. Có thằng khác này đây gần 10 phút nữa đến nơi rồi.
right? bánh mì đây. Sure.